Welcome back to the Cineposium podcast, where each week members or collaborators of Cineposium curate films for remote viewing, and then talk about those films on this podcast. This week, Samantha Tecson, Li-wen Wang, and Mike Mazzacane discuss The Debut. Enjoy the conversation.
Being Filipino American for many years, watching film, I never truly saw myself. Until one day, I wandered into the San Diego Asian American Film Festival just for extra credit in a film class. For some reason, tears welled up as I finally saw a Filipino face on screen. I would start volunteering for this festival and constantly have tears mainly at the Filipino films. I sought after them because on regular TV, there was none. In general, very little Asian representation is on television and film. One day, the San Diego Asian Film Festival, during their spring showcase, had mentioned a little film that was the first Filipino-American film to be theatrically released. I had no idea about it and was so excited. Apparently, it was released in the year 2000, and I had never known anyone who had known of this film until Sadaf. So I thank Sadaf for introducing me to the 2000 film, The Debut, about a young man that is struggling to express his want to study art instead of going to UCLA. This young Filipino man by the name of Ruben, or Ben, navigates being in a sense, a first generation a Filipino American and the wants of his family and his own desires, all on the day of his sister's 18th birthday, what is called a debut. So all in one day, Ruben deals with the American world, the Filipino world, the Filipino-American world, and his own ideals as a teenager who's transitioning into college. Brought to you by director Gene Cajayon, starring Dante Basco of Hook fame, and of course, Prince Zuko, many of his family members from the Basco family, also starring Eddie Garcia, Jason Shaw, Joy Bisco, Teresa Cruz III. So a large Filipino and Filipino-American cast from not only the Philippines, but in America itself. Today, join me to talk about The Debut is Li-wen, Mike, and myself, Samantha. So I'd say the first kind of question I have for all of you, how was the film for you guys?
Oh, so for me, it's also the very first time that I heard about this film, and it was very exciting to look at the early Y2K fashion, and also with this, I think this type of storyline that never gets old, but it also depends on how it adapts to its current time. And it's very interesting to look at a domestic drama, especially in the Filipino-American context, because in fact, this is my very first time knowing there's a debut culture also in a Filipino culture, which I thought was interesting because I thought, wow, so much effort in the 18th birthday. I hope I had that too. And yeah, so and also it's cool to look at how the Asian American, or specifically Filipino American homosociality in the film, where they're all ganging up together with cars, because usually in a very white coming of age film genre that's usually displayed like very Anglo-Saxon, but here I think it's very fun. And also shout out to UCLA, but he's repaying the scholarship. So
yeah, like I didn't know this movie existed because all I knew Dante Basco from was his role as Rufio in Hook and as Prince Zuko, and then some other like voice roles that he did. Like watching this movie, I'm just kind of like, why wasn't there Dante Basco teen idol phase in this? Like, how did that not happen? Because like it's all there. like there is like Filipino specificity to this film that I am a Italian American white dude, not my, I don't know. I would be the bleach blonde white friend who would just stand there like, this food's good, you guys. But like, it's just like, how did like, it's a total early aughts like teen movie. How did this not get wider release? It's such a, it's, everything about it is like stereotypical teen movie, and that like also the just it's basically 3 sets. Like the filmmaking within like the economical filmmaking of like making this indie movie, I found really great, because like they bust out the crane shot for the dance off sequence, and I'm like, yes, that's when you would do that, even if like dance offs suddenly spontaneously happen. It don't make sense, but it looked great.
Exactly. I was also thinking, I'm not sure, but when I was a kid, I was watching at Hook. I always thought him as very cool, but I was not sure about whether that was also happening in the US, because even my dad, he watched it with me when I was a kid, and I was talking to him the other day saying, oh, I'm going to talk to my cohorts about this. And he said, oh, I remember that red-haired kid. So he even remembered, like an old man.
So deep shout out to Dante Bosco. If you ever end up listening to this is actually all secretly a club for you about how much we love you, and not just as Prince Zuko, not just as Rufio, but we said you should have had an era, and you still do. You're making films and supporting to this day. The fact that, yeah, you guys are right. Like it's so, I don't want to say like the fashion and the songs are totally in a time capsule. Very much a Li-wen, thank you for pointing out Y2K fashion, those tops and those bottoms. And I'm like, oh god, Bratz dolls. This was, they got the music. The soundtrack was done in 1999, according to very trustworthy Wikipedia, as I cross my fingers. Production in 1997. So it very much still fits within that time, because nothing within at least the early 2000s had ever really shifted that much until like later. But I think as we'll get into some of those some of the themes of like family and struggling with what happens when you are Asian American, but very specifically also we can get into that as well. Their definitions, they have that scene where they define the different types of Asians, but dealing with values from, quote, the old world, as some people might define it as in a lot of many other films, that like old versus new logic versus different cultural logics. So and family, those didn't age because they're always still there. We always still see them in movies. I think all of us can speak for it. We always see it in terms of when they American made from not the same culture ethnic movies, where they're like, they always have to deal with how much they dislike the other one. And I think this one deals with Dante's character of Ruben, or Ben. Ben does like the Filipino culture. He was just slightly embarrassed. So I guess the first question to kind of unpack is the dynamics between the different types of generations of, I'll in general say Asian Americans, though also we can impact that for the longest time, the Filipinos. We, as a Filipino myself, we're in different things because the classifications are all self-made, all made by certain people. So yeah, so what are kind of those, how do you think they dealt with the differences between being like a first, second, almost like third generation American in a sense, and just dealing with the values, and maybe other movies to pull from that you're like, this one did it this way, maybe not as well, and your own background with it? Because I know I have my own, I can add in.
I guess from the top of my mind, I think they cleverly use like language as a way to slice up the generations. Like when the granddad with the dad, they would talk. I always forget how to pronounce that. Wait, Tagalog, yes. So they would talk through that, and also it's also because I guess in a lot of immigrant stories they would talk about accents and also the use of the mother tongue as a way to differentiate, and also to as an indicator to see whether you're close to your culture. And also, I guess there's also this part when he was immersed, Ben was immersed in the culture, and he was also talking with, I think, Anna or Annabelle, where he's very impressed with her keeping up with the mother tongue, and he's overwhelmed with the language, and also hearing, even though he does not really know what his father and his grandfather were talking about, but it still sounds steamed and no. Yes. Okay, I need to end that thought. So.
Yeah, the fact that for Tagalog, the Philippines has actually a bunch of different. That's the one that we know as like that's the one everyone speaks, right? But there's over like my grandpa is like there's 200 plus islands. We have so many accents. So when I was attempting to start to learn Tagalog through like Mango online, my grandpa was like, "Oh, you're gonna learn it better than me." I forget he actually speaks. It's spelled like Visayan with a V, but V's and B's and Tagalog are like, yeah, as you heard in the film, are like kind of opposite. So it's Visayan is what he speaks.
Oh.
So that family speaks that. In the film, they are speaking Tagalog, as far as I know. I don't know how to speak any of it. I get yelled at in certain words. I'm just like, yes, that I understand. But yeah, the interesting you bring it like the mother tongue is always like, do you know it? I think they do a good job of talking about, in a sense, without actually saying it, the culture of when you're in America, you're taught to like erase that, to you have to blend in. So when my dad came over, he was very young, so he can't speak it, but he can kind of understand it. But he has a very also in terms of accents, who still has their Filipino accent. There's a part I think about at the end where the cousin or the two dudes are in
close friends.
the one guy's friend who's like, you're a fob and you've been here for 2 years, yet you have your accent, what the hell? And I'm like, my grandparents have been here for over the years that I've been alive, and they still have their Filipino accent, and it doesn't come and go. It's there, right there, and all that. So it's very interesting to see like that was the identifier that they're like, we need to get away from that because it's bad, because there's that system of we need to be Americanized, and America was one of our colonizers too. So there's that. And just kind of the dynamic of you end up losing a part of sometimes their culture when you're like, I don't understand everyone speaking around me with it. And there's kind of like a sadness to it, which even I feel at times. I'm like, I don't know what they're saying, even though it's probably something about why wasn't I a nurse again. Would you guys say there's anything similar in your guys' respective cultures where this kind of happens as well, or that you've seen or experienced yourself?
I think it's not exactly analogous, but even I, born and raised in Taiwan, I'm not that familiar with because there are also different groups within the Han people. So like my grandparents are Taiwanese, so they would speak Taiwanese, and they're not that fluent in Mandarin. And so they would have a very heavy Taiwanese accent in Mandarin, and my Taiwanese is not that good, but I can understand most of it. But whenever I'm trying to, I would try to communicate with them, and then my grandparents would want to communicate to me in Mandarin Chinese, and then my mother would be on the side talking to my grandpa, saying, it's okay, just talk to her in Taiwanese. You don't need to talk in Chinese. And he'll be like, okay. And he'll try and talk to me, but they'll also, it's not bad, but they'll often say, oh, I sound cute because I have like a weird accent speaking Taiwanese. But I guess that's a lot of like some friends around me, because their family are not necessarily very like their family don't speak that much Taiwanese. So sometimes my friend, they won't be able to understand like elderlies on the street talking Taiwanese, and they would ask, what are they talking about? And I would tell them about that. But yeah, so even in the homeland where people are speaking in different tongues, I guess with the generational gap, sometimes even when your grandparents are talking it fluently, it's still hard to catch up, even when you're immersed in the environment, I'd say.
So it's a little different for me because like the Italian, like technically I'm like Italian German, and like the Italian side of the family, like came over here in like 33 because of the three sisters, and like really it's my grandpa who was raised by his grandma basically and his parents, but like my great grandmother, like everyone, like she's passed on, but it's still like everyone basically up to my dad remembers her. And so like my grandpa has constantly been trying to learn Italian because also we got in contact with literally the family from the old country and they went there, and so he's like for years has been like trying to learn Italian, and finally he went to Italy, and it's very funny. He had an exchange with, I guess technically he's like a cousin of mine. We're all cousins somehow in this family. Um, Basically, like he asking like my mom and my grandma would say this thing in Italian to me. What did it mean? And basically, uh, he would just like, yeah, no, that she was telling you to shut the fuck up. But like there is a certain like linkage in like by Italian identity, as it were, that like I don't feel compared to like say even my uncles. That it's like because like I am now like fully in that like generation of like, oh, I'm American essentially. But like that, like the emphasis on like learning Italian is like changes on who it is. But there was a big Italian kick in the family a few years ago.
So yeah, that would have been very so that would have been very similar when we got to the scene where there is like the, in a sense, Dante's sort of learning the language through that one day, being like, oh gosh. Again, you end up picking up some words you get yelled at, even if maybe you don't know the definition. So talking to someone else who totally knows Tagalog, and I'm like, yeah, like my grandma's like, like I don't go like you're gonna get palo, and that's like to get spankings. What we were told it is, and all this other stuff, and they're like, yeah, it's roughly that. And I understand there's some direct translation to translation issues, but yeah, there's just in general where like language and the culture goes together. But it's I like that it kind of says it's okay that at some point it makes sense why maybe you just didn't know it. And I kind of enjoyed like kind of back to the accent thing that as we know, watching old film especially and even TV, when they ask people, you're going to play an Asian character. So for many people, it depends on where they're considering Filipinos. Which again, we know the Asian diaspora is more than just, 4 countries of like Japan, China, Korea, and Vietnam. It encompasses so much more with different varying skin colors. And we'll get into that in a bit later. But the fact that none of them are advocating, and you can tell, at least from what I can tell with my own background, they didn't feel like they're advocating any like fake Filipino accent, or if it was, it would have not sounded like that. We know it would have been the stereotypical all around Asian accent. So what I really enjoy is they all had varying ones. So someone had one that was lightly there, someone had one that was strongly there, distinctly a Filipino accent, but also ones that are like, I have an American accent. I don't like Dante Bosco's voice is so distinct that I don't assign it like it has an accent. But when I think about it, it's like, oh, it doesn't particularly sound like it has a Filipino accent to it. It's a very like, I don't want to say like it's a very American voice, but it's like, oh, it sounds like it just doesn't have the quote Filipino accent. And I'm so glad. And I think it's because the film was funded and helped by, and directed by a Filipino American, in general, any film by an actual Asian American, that they're like, whoa, we're not going to do the all around accent. But I think kind of the next thing to kind of talk about is like the bigger cultural differences going to, so Ben's dream and wants, he wants to go, he likes comics, and we started with that, and Mike and I popped really hard because we love comics. So he likes comics, he likes drawings, he takes all his savings, he sells his comics like Kevin Smith did, and he wants to go to Cal Arts. And we, the UCLA kids on this UCLA podcast, he's not going to our school. So he's going to Cal Arts for, to be an artist. That's his wants and dreams. But his dad, who is a postman, which my aunt has said is a very actually common job for Filipino men at times, that and later on the tech industry, but he wants him to be a medical, he wants to be a doctor, the dad wants Ben to go to UCLA scholarship, be a medical doctor, and that's like the main conflict, one of the biggest main conflicts throughout the entire night. And it ends with the reset of, you know what, I accept your dreams, because I kind of proved an acceptance. So how do we kind of unpack that and go through that? Is that more, I feel like it was because he's like, and as he says, we are working through since being like low to middle class right now in America, life's been really hard, we moved in a sense for the American dream, and I want you to do better. This is where I see a stereotypically good job, and in a sense stereotypically for a model minority, hey, you're Asian. Again, that gets discussed of what type, but we tend to be in medical jobs or in higher jobs. Let's go for that because it's seen as good, but that's not what you want. So kind of like, how do we deal with that, and have you dealt with it? Because I have, where they told me to be this other stereotype of, you're Filipino, you should have done nursing is a good job, but that just didn't click with me. I do have many aunts and family members that are nurses, and I respect all of you. That's just not what I wanted to do. I went into this.
I just want to pop in a side note that I don't know why in a lot of coming of age films, even to this day, they would always have the best schools option to go to. Like always, I'm not going to Harvard, I'd rather go to Yale, or I'm not going to UCLA, I'd rather go to Cal Arts. But yeah, and also, I don't know if it's just me, or I guess oftentimes in Asian-centric storytelling or Asian American stories, they would put a lot of emphasis on this future determinant storyline instead of but I think this film, they also spend a huge amount of time exploring what it is being Filipino and Filipino American, which I really like. But then when they're also talking about like Cal Arts or UCLA or doctor or not doctor, kind of falls back to like this, I would say stereotypical portrayal of Asian families. The biggest issue in Asian families would be about whether of you becoming a doctor or not. And that also leads me back to that scene where his cousin was talking to the other friends like, you're buying this car because they want you to neglect the bigger picture. We're being oppressed. And yeah, that scene was also, I guess, poking fun at how the diasporic communities are being not diluted, but being also, because of these type of storytellings, people often would have this preconceived notion of, right, because you'll be in a doctoral degree because you're Asian, or you'll be doing that because of course your family would want you to do that, instead of it being a pure effort of themselves, I guess. But correct me if I'm wrong.
So like the selling the comic books thing, like automatically, like the class element of this movie is, I'm glad they really lean into that, because like that is one of the like continual like things of in these teen movies in general is like, oh, we're going off to college, which like this is unrelated and a sidetrack, but like those Taiwanese rom-coms you show trailers of, like I'm very curious about like what the sort of like class dynamic is in those movies, because it's like, oh, we need to go to attain higher education, but like the thing about they're selling the comic books and like the dad not liking it, I was like, I'm like, it's the early 2000s, the comic book market itself has really cratered and is kind of coming back a little bit, And so I'm like, oh, it's probably not the best time to sell your collection. But also, I'm like, tell your dad about Willis Potashio. He technically co-founded Image and then went back to working for Marvel for various family reasons due to, I believe it was his sister got cancer. Like basically he had to go take care of his family and was like, I can't be a part of this risky business venture. But also I was like Jim Lee is also, he is not Filipino, but I was also kind of like, it also made me think of Jim Lee, who he's he's CCO at DC now. I think he's the chief creative officer, where basically like his family also wanted him to become a medical doctor. And basically he made the deal with them of, I will give comic books a try for 2 years, and if it doesn't work out, I will go become a doctor. And then eventually he gets on X-Men and blows up and is second only to Todd McFarlane and is much, in a lot of ways, the best artist of that Image bunch. And then then he sells it all to DC, and he makes all the money, and like he's done all right in the end, you guys.
Yeah, I enjoy that. That's like, yeah, there is a bunch of examples, but again, like kind of both you guys are saying, including the class aspect and including as my favorite character, I think ours was just that the guy who was like, this is what's really happening. And I was and it was shocking because these are conversations I've heard more, pop up within the recent years, but the fact that was there in 2000, and I think that speaks to, I want to say, our education system in America kind of ignoring that as well. And that's what he touches on for that character. That I want to say he would be stereotyped probably as like the liberal arts student, and probably like, I feel like they would make him, oh, he's too woke in like a white movie. If that, I feel like that's how they would have cast the character, but he very much was like, no, this is what's happening. Historically, they haven't told us. And I literally, all these things I hadn't heard about until very, very, very recently as well, where it's like, yeah, some of the parts of the Filipino-American War, they're parts of blah, blah, blah. Parts where in general it's interlinked for all. And he included, and I think it was more powerful, he includes every person of color in this statement when he says like all of them are, oppressed by systemic racism. So the fact that when we look around, even though it's maybe not blatantly said at times, you can see throughout the film, it's not the best looking of, when we see the home, it's not the best looking of homes. When we see the venue, it's a lot of, and this is also like, we use a lot of plastic plates and stuff, but like plastic plates and all this other stuff, we're like, oh, someone might stereotype, like, oh, that's cheaper. Or in a different teen movie, that would be seen as like, oh, it's the low class kids and we got the high class kids in a different party. So the fact that there is a class element, it's, very, very much tied to race and not tied to like, oh, it's just because they're immigrants or something. It's like, no, it's because there's always a racial aspect of it. Also our thinking of when we come over here and we're like, you know what, the American truth is this and this is going to happen, that some of us are still tied to those thoughts that came over as well. The Philippines was colonized many times. A lot of our culture for indigenous cultures was erased and burned by the Spanish Inquisition initially, and later on some other forms of colonization as well. So the fact that, even we're like, hey, I think we can, stereotypically, we're going to go into these medical jobs and do fine. That's not, we know that's not the actual reality. We know they get stereotyped again in many films where like, the Asian is the one in that role, but that's not true to real life, and they're not treated the same at all, which is the unfortunate reality. So the fact that, again, without fully saying it at times, just it's like systemic racism exists, and that conversation in 2000 happening is astounding with everything else that kind of starts to come out, or it's like something easy to ignore. So I think the film really is tackling several different things at once, but they don't have to sit there and be like, so today, kids, systemic racism, today, kids, this. And I'm very glad they tackled that. So kind of going on that racial aspect, we have two things on that. So they have the conversation, or there's several conversations that kind of happen. One of them mentions that there's, oh, you can't call us Orientals, that's different, we're in the Malay category, oh no, we're Asian, and they very and there's a lot of use of the N word, like hard N, full R word. So in terms of racism and race in this movie, we have pretty much an entire Filipino American cast. We have the two friends, one of which is white, one of them seems like a white Hispanic. And then we have some of the family members, mentioning other races. We also have like the interaction with like the white kids party, which I think my notes literally said for that music was something along the lines of like white kid, like white boy skater-esque party or something like that, because that's what it felt like. Oh no, like white boy headbanging music for that party that he's in. So we have very blatantly a conversation that has come up even recently, that there is anti-Blackness within the community. We also see that they do sound anti-other ones. So kind of, is this a conversation that you're like, whoa, I can't believe they're having kind of then or mentioning? And kind of how are your feelings on it? Because I'm glad it's the bad character that if they had someone use the word that is framed as the bad character, but maybe they could have been like, yo, you don't use that word because that's not cool. And if they maybe went a little bit more into it, I feel like they could have said, dude, and again, there's the character that did bring it up, we're just as brown as everyone else in like America's eyes, so we're all under the systemic racism, so we shouldn't be doing some of the stuff. So kind of like, how did you deal with some of these things, and have you been like, I'm surprised this was a conversation in 2000?
I think I'm not sure about the differentiation between Malay and Asian, because I might be wrong, but yes, because I know that Malay is, because I guess the part that kind of disturbed me is when it's like a white man trying to educate Asians on whether you shouldn't be using the word Oriental, even though, the Oriental word is a more, it's not a praising word to use, but then when a white guy is telling the Filipino family about, you shouldn't be using that word. And I thought it's very interesting that the Filipino, I think it's the female member, she just replies again, oh, we Orientals and blah, 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 blah. And she's just not going to care about him. But it's also interesting when, I think Gusto, he's constantly attacking Ben being like a coconut or being whitewashed, while he himself is also kind of leaning toward the more African-American aesthetic, but he feels like he owns that vibe, I would say. And so but just like what you were mentioning about, perhaps it's because his villain setting that allows him to use the N word instead of being, I'm not sure if this film, when it's being released, whether like the N word discussion or his character is being criticized or talked about, but I guess I was very interested in like the aftermath of his gun reveal thing, because it seems like there's something going on within Gusto's mind when he's even standing up for his mom, and that kind of stuff. They should have a debut too, and then we can look into Gusto's life.
More Bosco always, and more of those films, of course.
Yeah, and I was also thinking about, I think it's in Never Have I Ever, not sure if that film or the other films where they would be like, there would be aunties or standing on the side discussing the family member who marries a white family member, and they would be talking about, oh, I heard he's impotent, or it'll be like ostracizing the members who's gone out their racial group. And it's also, and like to your previous note, you were talking about like the venue. I think Never Have I Ever, they also rented like a high school venue to do their, I'm gonna be beaten because I forgot what the event was about, but yes, but I need to look it up or else I'll be blacklisted.
And so I think, like, this conversation has come up more recently. Of course, while Li-wen is looking this up. So the fact that there is so much, as Li-wen said, there's a white dude explaining the racial differentiations to us when I went to the Museum of Man in San Diego, and literally they showed the different places they put every Asian in throughout the years. So which is even more hilarious in a sense where it's him telling us that. But the fact that in a sense they do again kind of touch on it, but that there is a prevalence. So people think that in general, just because if we're all in, PSA for all people of color, we cannot be racist to the other ones. That is inherently a wrong idea because there's colorism. And to explain colorism, it's the fact that if you get darker, you are considered like lower class, lower seen. If you are lighter, you're, better seen. So it's the preference towards a certain, skin color, even within a culture of people of color. So the fact that when they get into, if we get into very specifically anti-Blackness, and these are all cultures that would all have existed next to each other because of systemic racism. So we're all in the same places. So I think we all do have cultural exchanges. That doesn't make it okay for us for any non-Black person. This is even a thing discussed within their community, the use of the N-word. But the fact that, he's letting that, like Gusteau is just letting that fly out as an intimidation tactic. Recently there's been, I believe it was some K-pop stars or rappers that were freely using the N-word as an insult, like hard R N-word at people. So we're here to say and condone that it's not okay no matter what. And within the cultural exchange, that to be aware that there is racism within our own communities. They don't really talk about the colorism aspect that much because within the film they are not the darkest of Filipinos. I am pretty because I'm mixed, but there's much lighter and there's much darker. But even within the Philippines, the darkest of dark, getting closer to the indigenous, are the ones that tend to be, forced to be lower class. So they don't really get into that, but I think they hint at it as well. So I think that, again, they're having sort of this discussion being there in theaters as well, because it's distributed by Sony. Was kind of powerful. So I don't, and the other aspects where and maybe let's talk about that party scene too. Again, going back to the, when the interactions with Ben being called like white in a sense, or his Asianness being weirdly brought up. So let's kind of talk about the scene where the white girl gets drunk and they play Never Have I Ever with the big gulp. So Mike, you made fun of the big gulp.
Like, she's the only one with the big gulp. It stands out amongst the Dixie cups of the party scene. It's just a strange bit of branding is all. But like, yeah, that like it's interesting to consider how that scene is the scene where they go like, even like his friends like understandably are like, hey man, that's not cool, because it's not very cool at all. Like, even to like describe it that way feels kind of slight. But you have that scene kind of come up, and it's she's getting it wrong because it's operating on this assumption of a homogenous idea of just Asianness. And so it's just, yeah, that's messed up. And I kind of had to stop to tack on to what Li-wen was saying about Augusto's character of like, basically like in the end, toxic masculinity is the villain of it all. Like, it's toxic masculinity in conjunction with systemic racism that is like the key to everything. Because like, is it just, ooh. He needs a hug and to learn to express his emotions better instead of just trying to prove he's a man all the time. Because like, even then, like the movie does a good job of constantly pointing out that is in itself an act. Because when he's with Annabelle, when Ben's with Annabelle earlier, she's talking about how like it was a year ago that he was totally not like this, and then like he's talking about in middle school, yeah, because like you're kids, you don't know anything. Yeah, that party scene, like one, it's a really like once again on the like economical, like both like in like money sense, but also just very dense narrative storytelling. It's like, no, you just need this one scene to exist real quick to really like point out like how he is existing in a liminal space of not he's not passing for white, but is existing in a like passable white dominated culture where that is considered the norm, and so he doesn't want his friends to see his like they make the point of like they never go inside his house, like why does the house smell weird when I'm like it's cooking.
Side note, I looked it up. It's Ganesh Puja, and I think there's also a scene where they're ostracizing another family member who like stepped out of the family to, I think, pursue her own career or also marrying a white guy, I think.
Just on the white husband thing real quick, we all kind of had the moments like, oh man, he's not the butt of every joke. Even he's like turns to his wife, it's like you need to see this for what it is. Everyone's like, oh no. It's like, is he Gusto's stepdad or is that his biological dad? Because I wasn't sure.
I think it's stepdad. I think at one point they were mentioning like somewhere his biological dad died and then her mom remarried, and then Gusto never mentioned of his father again, I think.
Yeah, that part I was having trouble trying to track too, because I think they only said it in the beginning when she's introducing and the family, you know, and then I don't remember if they say like if she just says, "Oh, it's your uncle," so we don't know if that's like Gusto's, like it's Gusto's dad, but like is that a stepdad or dad? Because then it either way it then it conflates of what happens, where it's like, well, he's getting mad at if he's mixed and he's getting mad at Ruben, and he's getting mad at Ben for being, quote, a coconut white. It's almost like he's sad that he's not as, maybe he's like jealous that Ruben's actually more Filipino than him, but he's not, you know, expressing it the way he wants, which is ironic because then he's absorbing and, you know, taking AAV and getting more into like Black culture and taking that instead. And you're like, you're not being, quote, Filipino either. But again, that's a very conflated term to try to define yourself by exactly that, because you could be your own brand of Filipino-ness. And then on the other end, if it's not that and that's a stepdad, then maybe that's more of a reason why he's extra mad at Ben, because like, well, your dad isn't, you know, white, mine is. Which even weird to say, it's there is in our Illustrisa professor, Jasmine Trees, had talked to me about it, where sometimes for mixed race in the Philippines, because she did research there, that it's sometimes not seen as good because of like the military and stuff. So you might be, quote, like a, you know, a bastard child of sorts. Whereas my grandma told me and my two other cousins and my brothers essentially that are also mixed white and Filipino, and she's like, we can make you famous over there because you're lighter and you're American. So like, again, that brings up that point as well, to the not only the influence of colonization, but the influence of like colorism. So I guess because we don't know about Gusto that much, that is a very interesting thing for the debut 2 years in the future. Come on, Li-wen's pitching this debut too. That we could explore that, because if it is that, then there's 2 different ways that could have gone, and I think, you know, that's a very interesting aspect. I'd say though, maybe for like the last point, because I know we've talked a bit, besides a big celebration of Dante Bosco, you're a great actor in this entire film, and all of you guys are. This film is so unapologetically Filipino. What are kind of some things you were picking up and noticing with however much knowledge you have of Filipino culture? And I can kind of do my best as someone who is a first generation American and have to go over it. But what was your favorite parts of seeing that you're like, that's definitely, like, I never knew that about the Filipino culture, like that's cool. And there's one joke I want to bring up, that when Mike and I were watching with each other, they say something about the one friend comes over and he says chocolate meat, I told Mike what it was, but if you can tell me what you think it is, and I'll tell you what it is in a bit at the end.
I don't think I picked up that joke. What does that mean?
So the friends eating chocolate meat. So all the food, there's this panning shot with the food, and all of it, if you were Filipino, you've seen it. There is the pig with the whole roasted pig. That is our lechon. We are known for it. If you ask, we're like, yeah, lechon, that's ours. And it has all the desserts. It has pancit, the pansapihon, which is the thinner noodles. It has all that. So the one friend who's the Hispanic one, he's like, oh, they gave me something, they called it chocolate meat. This is a trick my grandpa had told me. So when I was younger, he would feed me this dish is called dinuguan. They told me it was chocolate. I would eat it. I loved it. I'm like, oh, it's slightly tangy, irony taste. And like all Filipinos, but like there's a scene where they're asking for vinegar. That is a thing. We love vinegar. And that's a lot of Asian diaspora. Like all around Asia, we love vinegar and rice. Like as much as that's like a racist stereotype, at the same time, well, it is our main staple and we love it. But so dinuguan is actually like a pig's blood dish. It's in color, it's brown. So in comparison, people might think like, oh, mole, some moles have chocolate in it, not all moles do. So people, at least my grandpa, when he was like, my grandpa Ray was like, yeah, it's Samantha, it's chocolate rice. And I'm like, okay, yeah. And I ate it as a kid. Then he told me the truth and I felt betrayed. I still love this dish, but I didn't for a long time because I was betrayed. So hilariously enough, for the inner Filipino joke, the chocolate meat he's eating is actually like a blood-based dish. It's really, really good. Like, take my word for it, it's really good. It's got a lot of like pork and like nice pork fattiness. It has vegetables in it. Really good, of course, with rice and vinegar. But yeah, you get told it's chocolate as like a joke. But that was the entire joke. He's like, yeah, chocolate. But kind of, what are some other things, like besides that? I know that joke was like a personal joke, but like what other things that you guys were like hyped for when you saw her? You're like, oh my god, I've never seen this, or this is just like, I just never knew this aspect of, Filipino culture.
The large utensils, they call that out multiple times, so that must be a thing, because like my grandparents, they got the large things too. So I'm like, it's not like, I don't, yeah, like the large utensils also. Yeah, I was just like, the chocolate meat, I was like, oh, it's like a mole. And then you're like, it's blood. And I'm like, oh, mole fusion.
Yeah, it's a beautiful mole. We take things in culturally, our food is from a lot of places, so that's why some of them. So for those listening who speak Spanish, you're going to hear this word and go, oh my gosh, this needs something different. So the one sponge cake, I don't remember if we see it anywhere, but like there's this big brand called like Goldilocks, and there's also another one called Red Ribbon that distribute this cake in America. It's called mamon in Spanish, or completely different. For us, it's like, oh, it's a sponge cake. It's this different thing, and we have our own version, of course, of we have tocino, and I know tocino in Spanish is like just like, was it pork or bacon essentially, but it's, for ours, what could be pork, bacon, chicken, anything else, and it's like a colored candied meat in a sense. So there's a lot of things for cultural foods from like different places. Apparently, we couldn't pronounce kanji, so we called our rice porridge lugao instead, and we're like, yeah, lugao, like it's different. So and I tried to look up the cultural things for that. And our banana ketchup was kind of because of a little bit like World War II and stuff, and food that came in. So we make banana ketchup. So there's a lot of weird things with our food that are like very unique, that come from different forms, again, of our past of like colonization and war and everything else, that is kind of wild if you look at it. So the food aspect, I think, was, great. And the whole like the big fork and spoon thing, I believe people say that's also in some Spanish households or Italian households and other ones as well. So there's a lot of influence, but there's also the like basket with the little barrel man and the ding ding out. As my grandparents would say, we didn't have that, but it's another one. I'd say another Filipino staple that's in there. Any Filipino listening to this, you know you've seen it. You have the Last Supper. It's somewhere in your house. It's somewhere in your house. It is a picture in the film. I caught it in the background. It was a carving. You know you saw it. You know it's in one of your households. It's not in mine, but it is at my grandparents'. They're not too far away, in a big picture of the Last Supper, because we can't get away from our Catholicism. So it is somewhere, and you know it. You know you had it. It was in my one Filipino friend's house, and I made fun of him for it because I'm like, I know you're really a Filipino because it's right there. I see it. So the fact the Last Supper is somewhere in the house as well. And that's the one I see the most in a lot more Filipino houses. And like, of course, a lot of other Catholic things as well. And we see a lot of, again, you all know you can find Filipinos, if you sell hoy, if you just yell hoy, we will turn around, because that is the calling card. You saw it in the entire film. Hoy, Ruben, hoy, this, hoy, this. That is our calling card. That's our, as other people have like oi, other people are like, hey, that's our version of it. So if you just say it, we will turn around in our local seafood city very quickly, because we don't know, are we getting punished? Are we being normally called on? Who's saying it? Are we lost? We don't know. We just hear it and we're like, oh God, what do we do? Okay. It's just mostly like, play, look over here, or something like that. So it's so, again, so apologetically Filipino. We can keep on going. What other elements did you see? Were you guys surprised at maybe like the basketball, or let's see, like the van with the food, the conversation about nose, like kind of what other things, just because in this time there's been a lot of like, we don't celebrate Asian happiness a lot. There's been, recently there's been a lot of attacks against our Asian American community for every Asian across the board. There's been hate crimes. So to see a film that is just celebrating, it's a debut, it's a celebration, that 18th birthday, but it's a celebration for the entire culture, was so happy to see. So kind of to talk more about that, just because we don't get a lot of stories. We get a lot of Asian pain. We get a lot of, in general, minority pain in films. We get too many of them. How many, like, oh, or very racist ones, we're like, oh, the sad, the guy has to go teach the white kid to go learn karate. I'm sorry, Karate Kid. But all those. So kind of what, like, Filipino or like Asian American joy are you getting out of this? Just because we should be allowed to have these stories and should be allowed to have it. We also don't always have to be the good stereotype, because we've just had that on us for so long. But the fact that even through all this, that made the debut even better to see and made me kind of cry a bit, was Asian American happiness. So what did you see elements of that, and kind of, like what made you think this maybe seen again now is more uplifting with everything going on?
I suppose looking at like the sociality just within a Filipino American community is uplifting, very uplifting for me, instead of looking at it once again. Like when I started the film, I thought, is this the film Sam was talking to me about? Because in the beginning with the montage, it was all like white American pictures, and then he was talking at the bookstore and his friend, and I thought, is this once again another film when only the lead is an Asian? But then when he's experienced that night with his community, I think that's what sparks this film, since it's just like what you were mentioning about, there's so many hate and pain going around Asian community. It's time for more joys of being Asian and spreading pride of being Asian American, and that one's culture is no longer only regarding food, but there's also dance and songs, and also I think this film kind of tackles why his dad was so stubborn on him becoming a doctor, because he himself know the pains of trekking his way to America, but then only gets to be a postman. And he's a kind of it's like there's this other film released on Netflix called Moxie, and there's this best friend character who's, I think it's Chinese American, and she's attacking. She's telling her white friend that you don't know why I'm always very careful around wait, no. Oh yeah, because in the film, that character, she's very intending on going to a UC Berkeley and to pursue a higher education and get a good degree. And then her friends would be like, oh, why aren't you joining us the action, like dealing with feminism and stuff? And then the Chinese American character, okay, this is a digression, but then she replies to her white friend saying, because you don't know what it takes for my family to come to America, and my family has sacrificed everything just for me to get a higher education. So she feels like that's the thing she needs to do to repay her family. And I guess there's also, because the ending of the debut is kind of not weird, but the dad looks sad, even though he says, I'll talk to your mom about it. But I was just thinking, he just got in a big fight with his dad the other day, and he's been caught out being only a postman, and he gets to briefly relived his once powerful dream of becoming a musician. And then the other day, his son still tells him, I'm going to Cal Arts. I'm not going to take the scholarship, but I'm going to spend all the savings that I got. So I don't know why I got onto all that rambling, but it's just, I guess it's also celebrating Asian pride, but it's also trying to reveal the thought process of why Asian families would suffer that much. No, wait, okay. I will mute myself because my thought is strange.
Once again, I'm a white guy, so like the whole like Asian American pride thing, like that's not my scene. I'm not sure how to answer that question. But on the scene with Roland and his dad, that was because I looked it up and Google tells me that where's Lolo? Carlos was his grandfather, was Ruben's grandfather, so that's his dad's dad. Like it kind of like reinforces like kind of like toxic masculinity is the villain of it all. But like you don't get to in like American teen movies in general, like you don't get that sort of scene where like the dad isn't just like a stern, no, you're going to become a doctor because that will help raise the economics of the whole family. Like you don't get the scene where like, oh no, like he is himself in some degrees pigeonholed and looked down upon within like it explains his reason for being in a really violent way. His dad is strangling him like right after like someone nearly got shot. It's very violent actually. But like, and then just his kind of like quiet understanding at the end where he's just making eggs, I guess, in his boxers the next day. Like it, like that, those two scenes really bookend well together for me from a like a dramatic perspective. But also like you don't like I can't think of other movies that are built around like Asian or minority groups in America in general, like where it's like the parental figures and in particular the dad figures are given that sort of like that little bit of depth, because it's so often they need to function as this thing to build up and react around the protagonist character because of dramaturgy and all that. And so yeah, I really like that was a very nice quiet moment. And then he showed his dad his portfolio, and I'm just like, you're more of an 80s black and white boom kind of artist than a 90s image guy. and then he turns into like a bunch of Brian Haberlin-esque watercolors. So I'm just like, I want to know who did all the art for this movie.
Yeah, like that was you're right, like bookending it that dramatic way where it's like the dad being like, oh, you need to be like this, and you're right, we don't get those, either that or the dad's the only character in the movie and it's the kid who's like, I never get dad, I never got you, and then it's about like the dad being like, was it like 17 again or something, where like, then we're gonna go see the dad's point of view, and it's like, and it was about being a dad all along was better than reliving my high school, and and not understanding the kids. The fact that it's understanding everyone, or very specifically the dynamic between also, I don't think we talked enough, but Ruben and his sister being very normal. Like if people were to think against it, like stereotypes of like Asian families, it'd be like the mother's the one that's like, why aren't you doing this, this, and this, and again have a very thick accent that's like a very specific like fake Asian accent. The dad is also going to be stern, and then then the siblings like competitive against them, but the sister's so supportive. Like they're competitive in the normal brother sister sense, but like the fact that they're like, oh, we're gonna play basketball, and then she's like, oh, dude, you made it in the cards, and like, yeah, and they're like all happy. And then you have the dad, of course, who has many of his scenes, and I'll go back to like one particular one that really stuck out, but you have the mom, of course, that's just like, oh, like invite your friends in, and that's to Filipino hospitality, that is a thing where it's just like, yeah, no, invite them in, feed them. The comments, and it's kind of go back to like my favorite Filipino AF sort of things that are just little in there, where someone's gonna mention the weight thing, someone's gonna mention like, do your parents feed you? You're too skinny, and I'm like, oh my god, I've heard that so many times. They'll say anything, they'll feed you still. They're like, you're looking too big. Did you get bigger last I saw you at the thing? Okay, no, we have your favorite. We have rice, and we have this, and we have like sinigang, and we're like, yeah, they'll feed you no matter what. Even if they told you, they read you, they'll feed you. So kind of the cute moment where she's like looking at the friends, they're like, they're too skinny. Like we need to we'll feed them. But the mom's very also, you can tell it's like also supportive, and was like in between it playing like, do we go with what like the patriarch is saying, or do we go like with the son, but prioritizing like family togetherness over all of it. For the dad in particular, of course, we see the pressures from his dad. We see the pressures of, he's a postman, and to many people it's a lower end job, and again working past that. But there's one scene that kind of, to the audience, and of course to Dante Basco's character Ben, seeing this scene is what turns them, and that's when the dad is on stage and he sings his song in Tagalog, and just like the audience, Ben and his friends are like, oh, we don't understand what he's saying, but we feel it. So how do you guys feel about this scene? I think for me personally, that obviously, just like to Ben, it was the scene I was like, this is, I kind of already understood where the dad was kind of coming from, and I'm like, not the toxic masculinity, but it's like, hey, I understand where these thoughts and feelings are coming, but just that scene too is like, here's like the reset of all of it, like, oh, your dad's not just like, he's not stiff, he's very much a person, and he didn't get to live out his dreams of having a band, and here's this beautiful song he sings in Tagalog. I have no idea what it says, but you feel it. So like, what was your feelings about that scene? And again, kind of going back to that dynamic of and that turnaround, when that scene where Ben goes from like, I don't want to really be that selfish anymore, and then after the song goes up on stage and says he's sorry to his mainly his sister, because this whole thing is a debut for his sister, by the way. I don't know if we mentioned it. It's for Ben's sister's debut. She's turning 18, so this is for her, and he apologizes on stage after, because he felt he was selfish for leaving. So like, yeah, like how did you see the scene? How do you intake that scene? And again, that's like very they chose, also interesting enough, they chose not to have subtitles. They had subtitles for all the Tagalog spoken except for that song, and that was a very interesting choice. I don't know what your feelings of it was, but I just feel like it impacted the feeling.
Yeah, no, like that was the really interesting narrative choice, because it's not in like, oh, I watch a lot of foreign cinema, but it's more like if you watch like The Bridge on FX. It's an old show, great show, by the way. Damien Bashir, you deserve better. The function of subtitles as a means of creating understanding is very functionally interesting to me. It's just one of those things where like you don't. It's a moment where clearly the director was like, no, we don't need to know what he's saying to feel it, and because like there was they did something where basically they didn't generally go like suddenly they'd go from speaking to Tagalog to English randomly. Like there have been other like multilingual films where they'll suddenly just start speaking English for no reason, despite having beginning in some other language and with subtitles. And it's like, why not just keep with the subtitles? It makes more sense. And so, like to have that moment where they're not there are no subtitles. It's just like, oh no, power of cinema. It's gonna make you feel things. Like this really wonderful, sweet moment where you're just like, oh, Dad has layers.
I think it's very interesting where you point out that they intentionally take out the subtitles so that you're overwhelmed or the feeling comes to you. Because I thought, just like Mike was saying, because the dad was always portrayed so stiff and stern, but then when he was singing, it's like he's very tender and soft and sensible.
Yeah, so we saw suddenly that the dad wasn't. Again, in other films, it would have been like, he's just one note. But the fact that everyone was so three-dimensional, maybe four-dimensional at this point, but they're so that the dad again wasn't just the stereotype of, why aren't you getting A's? Why aren't you doing this? But he was like, this is where it comes from. These are the dreams I gave up. And you know what? And in the end, not being a turner, I'm glad at the end the turnaround wasn't, oh, you're right, Dad, I should do this because you gave up so much for me. And I kind of, someone had described it so, and I can't really find this piece where it talks about like, in a sense, like emotional. I mean, there's totally some may call it physical abuse. It's just a really weird thing, like the head slap at the thing. We had like a head slap counter going in this movie. It's kind of I know it's not just a Filipino thing. I know other cultures have like a smack on the head, like, oh, you're being a doofus sort of thing. So that in itself can be unpacked of like how you see it. I think how they were mainly using it was just like ay nako, you're being a doofus right now. So I don't think that was as like physical abuse, but the kind of the emotional abuse that comes with, hey, or like a manipulative kind of abuse where it's like, oh, well, I did all this for you. Like I raised you, I did this. You have to do this for me, which a lot of people go through. A lot of people see where family members will pull down on you and you're like, that's very insensitive because I'm not you. And the fact that it could have gone that way if it wanted to and it didn't, like it kind of sort of tapped into it. And then you could see while the dad is singing, you know, in Tagalog and he's being very tender, it's the fact that I think that's when he himself had also realized, hey, yeah, that's not fair for me to do that to my son either. And at the end, you know, where Ben's like, I put my savings into it. I sold my comics, that he knew he was being serious. Like the dad knew that Ben was being serious instead of like, I don't want you to just, you know, flagrantly go off to a dream. But, you know, and he's not holding that against him, not trying to redo like a, well, I raised you or I sacrificed so much for you. Why aren't you doing this? You know, that's his own thing to unpack. But the fact that they went into it and they weren't like, yeah, that's okay to do. And it's, you know, we've all gone, I think a lot of people have gone through it. Maybe we all have, where like, that's not ever okay to hold that on someone. And he doesn't. Towards the end, I think he starts to realize that's what happened to him because the dad's there and all that. So the fact that, you know, again, the aspect of family, I think that transcends race. The fact that if you really think about it, so it was the first, so by 2000, the first Filipino-American film to have a wide distribution. Later on, Yellow Rose is the first, by Diana Paragas, is the first Filipino-American film to have like a big studio backing behind it. And that still was an indie film as well. So I think maybe like the second and last thing to touch on is the fact that it's, you know, an indie film from from not only just Filipino Americans, but you can extend it to all Asian Americans, to Asian Americans. A couple years later from the debut, so like around 2003, we get Justin Lin's film as well, Better Luck Tomorrow, which infamously at I think it was Sundance, Roger Ebert stands up and defends the film because someone says a very racist comment about like why are the Asian characters quotes so bad. So we have very distinctly still indie films. I want to say sometimes not as widely distributed or known about. But if you really look at the themes and you really take a step back, even if it's not your particular Asian culture, even if it's not your particular race, family, generations, all of these are, transcendental. So why are these films still kept? I mean, we know why, but in terms of pretending that like we don't, why are these films, even to this day, we have now Minari and other ones that are barely still in there, and they're like the one Asian film in the category of the Oscars, one Asian American film that has that. Despite all these transcendental films or themes, why are Asian American films, and we can include just in general, even diasporic Asian films as well, why are they still kept under, I want to say almost under wraps and not as widely known? Because had I known about the debut in 2000, I'm sure every Filipino household would have played this. There is, I think it's called like the Gold Box or Filipino, or Asian films. And it's the Asian community who runs this, will go storm these films on like the first opening night because of golden opening night for tickets. And a lot of this is community funded, but the fact that the wider community doesn't even know about this either. So yeah, like why are these still kept under wraps? And again, why thankfully is it, I mean, why is it always in the hands of the community themselves that have to go distribute and go ahead and get these films to everyone else when it should have already maybe had a wide release?
Do you want me to give the really kind of boring answer to that? Which is like, it's like the larger powers of hegemonic capitalism as a means to homogenize everything, wherein white becomes a default and universal when like the treatment of like whiteness itself is like people from Boston are different from people from Philadelphia, in Chicago, to get nothing of like, what was in Ben's TV class? It was when I think of Mama, like the idea of like, even like, they weren't Swiss. They were from the Netherlands. Netherese? No, that's from Wow. But like the treatment, basically like capitalism's treatment of like we need the quote unquote wide box 4-quadrant default of like safe movie making to make all our money, and the idea of like a Filipino American movie like with its limited distribution patterns due to early 2000s theater going stuff, it's really on the communities to really like, that proselytize isn't the right word, evangelize the products, because like Sony isn't going to put out this kind of movie. Well, okay, maybe Sony Pictures Classic would, but even then, that's the total like indie label of the major corporation that then wouldn't give a wide release, most likely because it's the early 2000s. Like, and then it's blame capitalism and like the idea of constructed view of whiteness as the default and all that in Western culture.
I mean, that's pretty much straight to the point. I guess like to maybe add on to that question, like, so we see that, so like you said, or like we say, like not wide release. I mean, wide release, but obviously not. It's no Avengers. It's no Fast Five. no Fast and Furious. But or even like something like The Irishman. So like The Irishman, where hey, that is an indie film that went on Netflix and all this other stuff. So
Martin Scorsese doesn't make $300 million indie movies.
Yeah, he doesn't make.
Like Martin Scorsese doesn't get to count as an indie director. He's Martin Scorsese.
That's true.
Even if he's now having to do business deals with Apple to get his movies made because of tectonic shifts in the economics of filmmaking, which are really sad.
Yeah, I was just thinking that because it was played at a couple of. It was played at like the San Diego International Film Festival So I was like, if it's in a film fest, they tend to, technical indie in a sense sometimes. But for a lot of these films, so not only the debut itself, but again, like later on, Yellow Rose, also Justin Lin's Better Luck Tomorrow, I believe also the Joy Luck Club as well. A lot of these are in the, a lot of these start their life at, oh yeah, and also Minari and oh my god, The Farewell. They all start their life out in film festivals and are kind of mainly there float around, but they're especially supported by Asian film festivals. Two these are kind of not the case in terms of like they're in Sundance stuff, but they do have screenings or special screenings maybe later on, way years later after the film was distributed. So the debut had its opening night attraction at the 15th annual Los Angeles Asian Pacific and Video Film Festival in 2000. The film also awarded Best Feature Film honors at the 2000 San Diego Asian Film Festival. Hi, Sadaf. Shouting out to you. But it's in a lot of, this film was in a lot of Asian film festivals. So do you kind of think it is always in our, like, the community's hands in which we are, pushing for these films, in which we are also asking for distribution, but even no matter how much we're asking, we're kind of sometimes not getting it as much, or, oh, we'll get it, but it's not as much as, everyone else is, as much as our, I would say, like, whiter counterparts. And and you can bring up counterpoints to that argument as well. Like, maybe you can see Minari as maybe not that, but kind of like, where are we in that? And should, and then we should empower people more to go to, should it be better explained that these festivals aren't just for, Asians, and anyone else can go into them as well?
Yeah, adding on to your point, I think a lot of the Asian American stories are often labeled as more indie and art house. And so that would evade a lot of the audience, since it's not that widely distributed and popular scene. But I guess, like, I've been writing a lot about, like, To All the Boys I Loved Before, that kind of films, they're trying to bring Asian stories, like, of course, Crazy Rich Asian, they're trying to bring that into popular screen, but it's still kind of at the expense of, just like Mike was talking about, whiteness is the default now. So whiteness seems to have a cultural discount in the, like, the global cinema space or American cinema space. So Asian storytelling, perhaps I'm optimistic. I think it's now starting to, especially with all the current issues, Asian storytellings are now gradually pushing into the forefront, and hopefully we'll see more just like The Farewell. It was supposed to be a art house or indie film fest film, but it's very popular, and Aquafina got the Golden Globe Award, even though, like, socioeconomically it didn't help that much, but artistically it's trying to make a wave, and now it's just the impact needs to take on in the socioeconomic world. Okay, that took a sad turn, but I'm hopeful, hopefully.
Yeah, no, like it's I don't want this to sound like I'm saying trust Netflix, because one, no, don't trust Netflix. But like what I like when I was thinking about, like, Asian American, like, directed or at least starring films, I was like, oh, Always Be My Maybe, well, and the half of it, and then To All the Boys I Loved Before. That's now a trilogy, right? They made 3 of those.
Yes.
Or is that okay? But like, I was like, because like Netflix quietly been making a fair number of these, because they are essentially these making NBC Universal's amounts of content these days and buying it. But like it's kind of weird for me to, like, look towards the streamers for that, because like it's not the case with, like, Minari. Like, that's an A24 movie. Like, I'm pretty sure they picked it up at Sundance for distribution. But like, also, like, we're coming, it is a Korean film, but like Bong Joon-ho won for Parasite not too long. Like that was last year. Feels like 3 years ago, but it was last year. So like you're seeing some like signs of potential structural change within the more mainstream traditional theatrical distribution window of Hollywood to a degree. But like oh, um, y'all, the Snake Eyes movies is coming out in July now instead of October, and like one, I'm very like I'm not going to see that movie in theaters because like it is still a time of plague. But like also Mortal Kombat, like so in a way, like I wonder if if we did like a 20-year data like digital humanities like database deep dive, what the actual numbers would look like. But it on some level, maybe because of all the conversations that have been happening this past year, 18 months, like we are just seeing it more. And maybe there's a bit of a statistical, like this is a standard deviation above the mean sort of thing. But yeah, like I would assume like Apple TV Plus and Netflix and Amazon would be the space because they need content, and you can sell a mid-level indie movie there better than at the studios because there's 4 of them now and they don't make those movies anymore.
Yeah, I also want to kind of, I mean, this is kind of getting away from the debut, but in general, I want to say also those stories are still, I want to say not sometimes encompassing all, it's still for a lot of these, it's in terms of, let's say, awards and getting into, and this is a paper I tackle, but there's the one that gets uplifted. So last year was Parasite, like the one Asian film. So not just like Asian America, but the one Asian film. This year it's just Minari. I have no problems with it, and the community does that as well. We're like, we just want, of course, more. It's the same thing with every other. It's like we want at least one in there, but we know we're more than just the one. And they're also particular regions. So again, what I love about the debut is Filipinos do not get considered sometimes Asians. Sometimes we are. It's been a historical thing. But we are, in terms of literal Asia, that does include people from India, and people do not think that all the time. They think, again, on the scale of brown, it's like, oh, they're brown. I don't know where they did. Like, I don't know where they are. In middle school, I had the example where people didn't think India was an Asian. They're like, isn't that like the Middle East? Because they're brown. They're much browner than the Asians we're thinking of, which is also unfair because that takes away a lot of the indigenous cultures as well. I want to say in America, we literally only think there's like 4 Asian cultures out there. So the fact that all of these stories, they do deserve to get told, because in general, all Asians statistically, look it up from the Annenberg reports, from the UCLA reports, from Professor Martha Lawson's, like in general, like celluloid like ceiling reports that talk about film and all this for statistics. In general, people of color, not shown as much. Asians, all across the board, not shown a lot. But when we do depict Asian people, it's very specifically like from 4 regions, or we grab only from those places. When in reality, there's so much more. The Philippines by itself, 200 something islands, and they're all different. They all have their own like microcultures. America, in its 50 states, have different cultures per state and even city. LA and SD were different. So the fact that a lot of these pieces, and in the case of, let's say, Raya, The Last Dragon that came out, and we have oh gosh, what's the one with the rock in it?
Moana.
Thank you, Moana. They kind of put all the different ones in there. So like a bunch of Southeast Asians have had mixed feelings for Raya because it's a Southeast Asian story. You look at the cast, not a lot of Southeast Asians. They were supposed to have a Filipino lead, took her out. So I'm glad the debut is a culture that isn't just what we think of. It's like, oh, it's not Japanese, Korean, Chinese. Again, not saying those cultures don't deserve films, don't deserve anything. No, they do too. we just collectively in America and in other places don't see enough of everyone else's. And there is a film culture. Our beloved professor Jasmine Treese literally studies that, and that's like her books. There's a film culture for the Philippines. There's a film culture for everywhere, and there's ways to express it. They just need to be expressed. And then for movies that do tackle it, yeah, maybe do make it specific, because when you have an amalgamation, we're like, yeah, Ray is good. Maybe hold on, and people like picking it's like which is from which culture. That maybe that's kind of and there's a wonderful professor named Sylvia Chong. I attend her SCMS conference, and she was saying like there's a fetishization, cultures, and even within class itself, when she brings up oh my gosh, Crazy Rich Asians, and that was a very particular part of like Chinese culture, and then they filmed in places, was it like Hong Kong and Taiwan, where it's like that's a contentious relationship, and it was like very strange. So I'm glad the debut, I think, because it was in the hands of like Cajayon, a Filipino American himself, that it wasn't a film that fetishized our culture or the Filipino culture. It wasn't a film that said, look, we're we're like the bastion of all Asians, or the bastion of all Southeast Asians, but it gave a very specific culture we don't see as much in a healthy way that's complex. So I'd say like kind of what are your last few like thoughts or like any fun things about this film in general? Also, we all hail Dante Vasco. You in our childhoods as Zuko, you're in our childhoods as Rufio. I'm really, really glad that you are having, by the way, this film this year to debut. This was its like 20th anniversary, by the way. So happy birthday to the debut of this year. It was a couple months ago. They had a celebration. Dante Vasco and Cajayon, thank you for this film. Also, I can't wait to see the fabulous Filipino brothers with Dante Vasco and his brothers. All about, a comedic film, all about, again, another like a Filipino American piece. So again, like kind of what's your last few opinions of this film? Any kind of take homes before you wrap it up?
Let me go first because I have something kind of somewhat jokey, and I'm sure Li-wen has something far better to say. But like, okay, they specifically name check Hulk 184, and the first quote unquote the first appearance of Gambit. One, there's nothing all that special about Hulk 184. It's just a issue that Roy Thomas did. It's fine. It's not essential. It's like nothing about what I've been able to find about it. It's like, yes, this is a key issue. Like it's part of the Incredible Hulk's second volume, and one, that's not very interesting. Two, I want to know when they say the first appearance of Gambit, I want to know if they mean X-Men 266 or if they mean it's the annual. Which annual was it? It was X-Men Annual 14, because technically 266 is set before Annual 14 came out, but Annual 14 came out due to shipping errors, came out first, and so technically that's the first appearance of Gambit. And either way, 266 is the one that most people spend money on, but it being 2000, I don't think they're spending like $50 or $60 on it. So I want to know what was in his collection, because I don't know how you get to $6,000 off of what appeared to be a single long box. Like, on one hand, I understand narrative necessity. On the other hand, I'm like, let's think about the economics here, people.
Was that the joke?
No, so like, I'm just like, let's talk about his comic collection, everyone. Like, cause come on, like that seems very trite.
Sorry, because I have zero comic knowledge, so I thought, Michael telling about a joke. So is that a joke? Oh, yeah. I guess my end notes would be, I'm just very excited to see more and more storytellings of Asian and Asian American or Pacific Islander stories, because Yeah, I've been in the East Asian area almost all my life, so I'm very excited to look at more Southeast Asian and Southern Asian stories because there's actually a great amount of like immigrant workers from Southeastern Asia in Taiwan, and oftentimes I don't really know about their cultures, but I would I would often see them at train station in a lot of places, but I would always have this, I would be afraid to walk up to them and just talk to them. Because I think one of my friends, she's in like a foundation where they would want to educate people more on like the bonding between Southeastern Asian and Taiwanese people, and also helping them adapting to Taiwanese culture, which I thought was very cool. And I guess one of the best ways to educate people and know more about their stories and their culture is through like film and popular film, especially in like domestic dramas and family, these type of universal themes. So.
Yeah, just there is that feeling, you know, of being seen. You know, I think for other people it's like, oh, it's just very small things. You'll see an aspect like being a woman, it's like, oh, seeing like an actual like well-rounded female story that isn't just a stereotype. Seeing my age story that's just a stereotype. But when you get to like sometimes a very specific, it hits home. So for the debut, what kind of bringing around to my intro story, there was like kind of some tears in my eyes thinking about how and happiness and of like, oh, I'm seen. Because there was so much like Filipinos in it that no one has to get except for maybe the community, but you feel it. That basketball, we love basketball. Filipinos love basketball. And as they said, we're short. We're not going to get picked, but they love basketball. The Filipino time comment, which is you can come really late to stuff and or you're like, oh yeah, I lost my keys, or we use my little brother as one. I'm sorry, every family member that might be listening to this. It's easy, but it's not true. But you know you feed us anyways. You know, like the nose comments, the Tagalog, the saying tita, doing the hand thing is like a very particular thing to do. And then the dancing. So there's that part where they do the dance. They do dinakling. So they do, you know, there's so much super Filipino aspects on like the wider aspect of like literally food, culture, and all this, but also just the inner relationships and how they're working. Being like, are you my family member at a party? I hope I don't have to like, oh, I can't have feelings towards you. That happens. You don't know who's your family member. They pop in and like in the beginning where they're like talking to, you know, Ruben and his sister, and literally they're like, oh, you don't remember me. That happens a lot. I forget all my 50 million family members, so I don't remember. But that happens, and you know, those are universal, and some of them are also specific. And I'm so glad the debut captured that again without like fetishizing any of us, giving us 3D fully rounded characters and people that are people. So kind of on just an ending note, there's a large breadth of Asians and Asian Americans. We all exist, we're all valid. We're more than people, we're more than food. We're not all boba drinkers, we don't all watch anime. And sometimes we do. Is there anything wrong with our love of rice? No. And there might be stereotypes we fall into. Some of us might actually be doctors, nurses in the medical field, working IT, but that doesn't mean we deserve to not be treated as human. So, in a statement against all the Asian hate going on, I'm so glad that there's films about joy and like Li-wen hope, you know, hopes for the future, that we are seeing more and more stories expressing not only just like a particular Asian culture, but all of them, and not it being always set under the guise of it has to be suffering, that it's also happiness or well-rounded. So for all the hate that's going on and the attacks, those are all wrong, and they go against our right to be human, and it goes against our right to exist, to attack people on the basis of where you come from. And it didn't start with Trump. It's been there for years. We've had the Chinese Exclusion Act. We had actions in awards where they take, where they only uplift the one Asian film and they think they've done good, pat on the back. So there's more we could do, and also as a community to fight against other aspects of racism as well, such as the inherent anti-Blackness and colorism as well. So again, being Asian American, being Filipino American, we're more 3D and complex than you think. When we drink, we don't eat dogs, we don't eat cats. We do love rice and vinegar. And at the end of the day, please go to the largest support you can give is all to the community centers and community-driven projects. The film festivals like the Los Angeles and San Diego Asian American Film Festivals, just watching the products and learning about them. Hell, going to your local Asian stores that are most likely run by families, going to them and just buying one or two items, even if you don't understand, or take time to listen in and ask, what are you buying? Just in case you get the chocolate rice. So go beyond your boundaries and protect all those around you. Don't set your mind in hate. Think about love. And all we can ask for is just a better future for not only Asian Americans, but intersectionally, every minority, every person who's been oppressed under systemic racism, and everyone who's been oppressed under heterosexuality and everything else that is the mainstream. So please go against that, support all you can. And also shout out to again, Dante Bosco and Gene Cajayon. Thank you for making this piece. And again, we're so excited for The Fabulous Filipino Brothers, which is coming out eventually, but it did debut at South by Southwest this year. Other Asian products besides ones from Dante Bosco, Steven Universe is actually all the voice actors, mainly a lot of the voice actors were people of color, a lot of them were Filipino. Watch Yellow Rose, that's all Filipino American. Go out of your way to find a lot more, a breadth, the whole breadth of Asian cultures. Indulge in it. We'll let you in. We'll feed you. But we're more than just food, but we'll make sure. So think of love and not hate. And see you guys next time for the next piece. This is a goodbye from Mike, Li-wen, and I. And watch the debut. It might be, quote, rated R. We can't really figure out why, but it is on Amazon, Google Play, and several other platforms. And I'm glad it's out there to still watch. And there's a DVD and a book that you can buy as well. So watch the debut and go find more pieces. See you guys.
That's it for our show this week. Thank you for listening and for your support. Please subscribe to the show on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow us on Instagram at Cineposium and on Twitter at Cposium to keep up with our updates and to keep in communication with us. Until next week, take care, everyone.